Now this is going to be a great evening. The concert has the title Fantastic Symphony because the Symphonie Fantastique of Berlioz is going to end it. There will be a chance to hear the UK premiere of a new saxophone concerto, and the chance to hear the wonderful Jess Gillam playing live. And it's going to begin with an overture by Wagner. Now, who knew that he actually wrote a comic opera? Mark, how did this wonderful sounding programme come together?
I'm thrilled with this programme because there's so many links between it. Berlioz was actually a friend of Adolphe Sax, who invented the saxophone, and was the first composer to write a piece for his friend with his crazy invention. I know that Danny Howard wanted to write this saxophone concerto partly to celebrate Jess's playing, but also to celebrate the saxophone. And the piece very cleverly sort of tells the story of the saxophone and in its early beginnings and how it's become such an important part of our sound world nowadays. So the link between those two pieces is very strong. And the Berlioz Symphony Fantastique is about unrequited love. So what better way to start it than Wagner's opera, The Forbidden Love, which what you call it a comedy, I mean steady. I don't think people are rolling in the aisles during it, but as Wagner goes, it's quite funny. It's based on Shakespeare's Measure for Measure, which is one of those comedies that is not as is betwixt and between genres, if you like.
It's full of ambiguities and cruelties, Measure for Measure.
What I love about it is people come expecting Wagner, das Liebesverbot in German, sounds very forbidding. And what they hear is just a delightful part Mendelssohn, part Johann Strauss, just glorious joy. And they realise that they did love Wagner after all.
I sought it out because I didn't know it at all, and I listened to it online last week, and I just kept breaking out in smiles. I made a note that it was Rossinian merriment, because he tries to be stern and forbidding, as per some of the characters in Measure for Measure, but the laughter just keeps breaking out. It's an irresistible piece.
You hear it, there's castanets, it opens with castanets, so if that's not orchestral giggling, what is?
And it's set in Sicily, and it ends with a carnival when the king arrives and someone apparently sings, if my online researches are to be believed, gay festivals delight him.
Yes. I mean, I put it this way, the overture is the best bit.
Okay, and it was a disaster, wasn't it, when it was premiered? On the first night, one of the singers hadn't really learnt their part and had to make it up, and the second night had to be abandoned when the prima donna's husband and the lead tenor got into a fight backstage. So the omens weren't good for Wagnerian opera, although true to form, he'd written the libretto, dejunced a bit of Shakespeare, and he'd written it himself. It's only been recorded a few times, I think, and it didn't get to Wagner HQ Bayreuth for a staging until 2013. Do you know anything about that performance? You're saying confidently that the overture is the best bit.
I heard a performance in London about 6 years ago, and you know, it's glorious to hear it so that you can say you've heard it, but I definitely think the overture is why it's still talked about at all.
Well, it'll be a very refreshing discovery for Wagnerians, because we knew about the Master Singers of Nuremberg. That's based on real medieval people, and there are no gods or horned helmets in sight. But that's a thought-provoking opera. It's not a rip-roaring comedy either. The fact that he could write a comic overture is a joyous discovery, I think.
I think your reference to real people is important, because I think there's a humanity there that can get lost in all the myth, even though the whole point of the myth is that that's humans at their most essential. But as you say, with the Master Singers, they were real people. In Das Liebesverbot, there's a sense of reality about it. And that, I think, is one of the reasons it speaks to us very immediately.
Well, it's going to be a treat. I've heard it, so I know. And the combination of you on the podium and the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra, I think, will maximise its potential for lightheartedness. And then it's going to be followed by a UK premiere, which I think is guaranteed to be a great deal more successful than Das Liebesverbot back in Wagner's day. It's only just had its world premiere at the beginning of the year in Stockholm. It was written, I believe, for Jess Gillam, and correct me if I'm wrong, but jointly commissioned by the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra, upholding its long reputation as an orchestra that takes an interest in new music. So tell me about the concerto. Apart from it being about Adolf Sachs, what about the actual music?
Well, I haven't heard it. That's what's so thrilling about it. I haven't heard it yet. And as you say, we partly commissioned it, and I think that's an important thing to do, is to be part of paying for new music, and especially with composers you believe in, with soloists you believe in. But it's incredibly exciting. There's a sense of ownership of the piece, and the supporters of the BSO should feel that sense of ownership, that we have asked for this piece to be written. But there's something very thrilling about giving. This will be the UK premiere, so nobody in Britain will have heard this until we play it for them in this concert. And there's something, it'll be the best performance of it anybody's ever heard. So that's a great start. But playing new music, it matters because it reflects our time. It's a mirror for us to hear what people are thinking, writing now. Is important for us to look into that mirror. But Danny Howe's music is very celebratory. It'll be very celebratory of the instrument and of Jess and of the orchestra's contribution to that.
And Jess is a player who infuses every note that she plays with sort of irrepressible zest. She's such a communicator. And of course, she's a star on social media as well as a Radio 3 presenter. And I did check out when she was preparing, the morning she embarked on the first rehearsal of the concerto in Stockholm, she posted on social media that she'd been dreaming and thinking about this piece, practicing it. It's been swimming round my head. So she's going to know it already better than anyone. This is so exciting, isn't it, to be with somebody who's created a piece?
I first met Jess when I had the privilege of conducting the BBC Young Musician of the Year final in 2016, which was an extraordinary experience because the three finalists were her, Sheku Kanni-Mason, and Ben Goldscheider, who is maybe less well known, but is an amazing horn player who's carving out an extraordinary career for himself and for the horn instrument as well. So to have those three young soloists as part of that night I'll never forget it. Jess didn't win that night. Sheku won, but everybody knew that Jess was going to be a star, not just because of the outfits she wore, but because of her determination and passion for playing for people, and that love of. It's always interesting when you do the Young Musician of the Year to see, they're always brilliant musicians, of course, but to see how they cope with the nerves, how they handle the pressure of that moment. And she was absolutely in her element. She was so excited to be playing, and I think that excitement she still has in spades, and you sense that whenever she walks onto the stage.
What about the different challenges of conducting a concerto with a soloist, different from a symphony? What sort of compromises do you have to make? What is the balance between accompanying the soloist and driving things on?
Accompanying is not a passive art form. Any singer will tell you that the accompanist is not just following them. It's absolutely allowing that individual the limelight, but is very much an integral part of the collaboration.
Well, after Danny Howard's UK premiere concerto, we shall move on to a piece written by Berlioz, who was a friend of Adolf Sachs, who is the subject of the concerto. And there's no saxophone in the Symphonie Fantastique, but my goodness, there's everything else, isn't there?
It is fantastic. I found it difficult when I was young to understand the piece. I couldn't quite work out where Berlioz's music sat in the history of music. It feels so modern. It was written in the late 1820s. Schubert, Beethoven, what on earth is this weird, radical stuff going on? And then I spent some time in Paris, and I realized that everybody's a bit of a maverick. And then I realized that whether it's Rameau or Berlioz or Debussy or Messiaen or Boulez, they're all individual, and they're all literally speaking their own mind. And once I kind of got away from the hang-up of where Berlioz sits in relation to Beethoven and just taking it purely for what it is, I loved it immediately, because it's actually just emotion. And we tend to think that in classical music in 1820s people weren't emotional. They were all very ordered and organised, and actually it's like Jane Austen, isn't it? The passion is there, and the passion hasn't aged just because it's 200 years later. Humans are just as crazy as ever. And so to hear music that expresses that wild passion, it's timeless.
And the symphony takes us to all sorts of outlandish landscapes. We're in a meadow with a brooding thunderstorm, we're at the ball, we're at a march to the scaffold, and we're at a witch's sabbath. And these are huge scenes. You can imagine them being painted by John Martin and people. But at the heart of it is this fixed idea that our narrator of the Symphonie Fantastique has, the unattainable woman, who is summed up in a few notes by Berlioz.
His obsession with her is summed up. I mean, he studied medicine, first of all, Berlioz, and idée fixe was actually a contemporary medical term for a sort of obsessive compulsion. So he'd have known that as a would-be doctor. And he went to the theatre one night and for a performance of Hamlet, and playing the role of Ophelia was this Irish actress, Harriet Smithson, who he just completely fell in love with immediately. Wrote to her saying, "I love you, I'm going to marry you." She, fair enough, frankly, didn't reply. Wouldn't have
Sensible
anything,
girl.
Wouldn't
Yes.
have anything to do with this crazy fan. He thought, well, I'm going to write a symphony about my passion for her. And that is exactly what this piece is. You hear him, this unattainable love. He goes to a ball in the second movement, and he sees her dancing, but he can't attract her attention. He then finds himself in a field listening to shepherds sort of singing to each other, but he relates to that because suddenly one of them doesn't reply. He takes opium to cope with his trauma, and as part of his hallucination he imagines that he's killed her and is now being marched to the scaffold to his death. And in the last movement, this melody that had been associated with his love for her takes a very diabolical turn and is laughing at her as he sort of descends to hell. But what I love about this story, if you like, is for the second performance of this piece, he did manage to persuade Harriet Smithson to show up. By this time he was more famous, and so she was taking a little bit more interest in who this obsessive fan was, and agreed to meet him afterwards, at which point he took out of his pocket a lethal dose of opium, took it, and said, "You've got to marry me, you've got to marry me." She absolutely panicked and said, "Okay, I'll marry you," at which point he took out of his other pocket an antidote, was immediately recovered. They got married. The marriage, despite neither speaking each other's language really, the marriage lasted 7 years. They did then get divorced, but they are buried side by side in Paris. And that story of their extraordinary courtship and relationship, I find wonderful, and it's a wonderful background to this extraordinary piece.
And I'm left thinking slightly that today, quite properly, maybe a struggling composer and a famous and beautiful young actress with whom he was obsessed would and should never have met. And then we would never have had the Symphonie Fantastique. Tell me about the actual sound of the piece, because he was a master of orchestration. there are so many wonderful effects.
Effects that we take for granted now because so many other composers use them. String players playing with the wood of their bow, for instance, is something that became quite common in Mahler and Strauss and so on. Use of offstage bells, again, a lot of composers have done that. So he was the first to really look at the orchestra and think, what can an instrument do? What can a double bass do?
Ooh, what can we do this?
Exactly. What can I
exciting.
do with the percussion instruments? What can we do with having players off stage and that sort of thing? And so he was revolutionary in a way that has become the norm.
His father really wanted him to become a doctor, am I right in saying?
That's right.
I mean, because that's a much more respectable career than being a maverick composer. And it just makes you wonder what advances he might have produced in medicine if he'd stayed the course. Dr. Berlioz will see you now.
I think I'd rather go and hear his music than the idea of being given some medicine by him. It sounds a little bit off-putting.
I think music therapy is the it's the best idea for Berlioz, yeah.